Warriors, Lebanon, aka Warfare 120 back, and like I said in a previous video, you know, the main idea of this channel is really be able to sit down, talk about albums that are coming out, and give you guys kind of a new idea of what we can see and kind of meander back and forth between as far as new content out there in the heavy metal community and hard rock material. That way you can have, as always, a broader and even more definitive understanding of the music world as a whole. And because of that, I want to basically go over with you kind of the format that at least as far as the grading process will be, as far as the albums that we're going to be reviewing on this channel. This may or may not be your idyllic situation of how we do these grading processes, but I do believe this is a very important way to look at it, and definitely a helpful tool. At the end of the day, any review is really just a subjective opinion, and ultimately, if you don't like it, well then, you know, make your own informed decision. All I can really do for you is take you through what I've experienced and let you know what I feel. And granted, my experiences are always going to be different than yours, so, you know, if we don't agree exactly on a particular album, that's not a problem at all. I'm always curious as to what you like and why you like it versus why I may or may not like it more. Let's get down to what our grading criteria is. We're going to be grading on a scale of 100 out of 100. As in, that's going to be the point scale that we're actually grading off of. So anytime that you're talking about this, that's how we're going to be using to define what's going on. Every single series is going to be registered into points of 10, as in 10 points for each of 10 categories, ultimately resulting in your total score of 100 for each album. Now, the 10 categories, several of them are going to be very highly subjective for the individual reviewer, which we're going to have multiple ones on this channel, which is going to be good. Because obviously you want to get different opinions rather than just this one jackass. But anyway, we are going to be using the same type of criteria overall, and some of you may say, well, this is not actually important, but I feel like it is. And so everything is registered as a 10 rather than being like, you know, super high importance on songwriting versus mastery of the music versus production versus whatever. So let's go over the individual categories that we're grading on. We have production. Production is very important. You know, so often, especially with high-budget bands or even low-budget bands, very often, if you have a production error where all of a sudden your producer or your mixing company just really just bottomed out your record, and where it feels flat half the time, or your bass doesn't feel very full, or you get a weird kind of twang, or it just doesn't feel like polished as far as an actual record, that can very much, in my opinion, hurt your actual ability to move as far as an album, as far as being able to grip me. Because it's one of the reasons why Metallica's Death Magnetic, which even though in my opinion it's a great album, probably one of the best one of my top Metallica albums. I'm not saying it competes with Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets, but it definitely can hold its own against the likes of the Black Album, and really, in my opinion, it can go toe to toe with And Justice for All. Just a personal opinion. And Justice for All is better as far as an album goes, but I do believe that it is a comparable as far as quality, as far as songwriting, as far as amazingness. But because of the fact that there has a little bit of a weird production value that makes it feel like it's dated when you're listening to it, people were hating on it originally. Thus, production, I believe, is very important for an album score. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is artwork. And this is not like, okay, what kind of artwork did they put in the box? I mean the actual album cover artwork. This may sound very silly, but a bad album artwork really, for me at least, makes me not interested in listening to the album. I believe that artwork is very important, especially in the metal community, and when your artwork is not up to par, it really detracts from your ability to grip me as far as getting interested in listening to your music. It doesn't even matter if I'm a long-time fan. You release an album with bad artwork on it or whatnot, or just artwork that really doesn't grip me, and all of a sudden, I'm not feeling it. So many albums, at least in my personal life, I originally picked up and gave it an initial listen, not because of somebody said I should, but because I was just scrolling through some pages on some website, usually metalstorm.net or iTunes, and saw the artwork, and I was like, I want to give it a try. So artwork, in my opinion, is very important. That's why it's a gradable scale on here. We have, of course, the songwriting, and this is not, this is a different piece than something else that will come later. But songwriting is what we're looking at as far as just does the music have a real good, what's the message behind the music? Is there an understandable message? Are they trying to convey something? And if they are trying to convey something, are they able to do it successfully? Does it feel like it's meandering? Does it feel like it's forced? Does it feel like there was only really 3 unique songs and the rest of the album was just a copy of the original, the first song created? What's going on as far as that goes? It doesn't have to do with technical proficiency, but it does have to do with do the songs feel original? Do the songs feel like they were written with care and love, or do they feel forced and like your record company was just trying to beat 5 more songs out of you to make an album? That's why it's important for songwriting. Pacing is the next category we want to be able to grade, and pacing is going to be essentially whenever I'm sitting down and listening to the album. When I listen to the album in complete fullness, does the album feel like I'm listening to it for like 2 hours? If it's an hour and a half album, does that hour and a half album feel like an hour and a half? Or does it feel like I'm on some kind of an epic journey where I'm not really paying attention to time, where time doesn't exist for that album? That's very important to me. When I'm listening to a record, if the album feels like it's forced, like 25 minutes in, where all of a sudden it's just a chore to listen to, that's not a good thing. And so pacing is very important. I want it to be a situation where, as I'm listening to the album flows together and is actually able to, as far as they're not losing momentum halfway through by going from epic 8-minute song to like a short little ballad to back to an 8-minute epic to where all of a sudden I'm just like worn out and beaten up. You want it to have a good pace as far as an album goes. That's a big deal. The next one is going to be standouts. Now standouts are actually, it can be, even though a band could get a 10 on this one for standouts, it might not be for a good reason. Let me explain. A standout is essentially on the album. Did I feel like there was a lot of there was a song or songs on there, or even the whole album, where I feel like certain tracks, if I'm just driving around, I'm all of a sudden going to get this one itch to hear this one song off the track. For instance, let's take Rust in Peace, which is an amazing album by Megadeth. That album, pretty much any of the tracks on it, at any time I could get the itch to listen to. I could be driving on the highway and all of a sudden just want to hear Lucretia, or all of a sudden want to hear I've mastered 5 magics, something like that. And that's very important for me is does the album actually have this kind of standout songs? And the thing is that, like I said, a band could have a situation where they have 3 really, really big standout songs, so they'll get a 10 in this category. But the rest of the album is so poor that they're getting a 10, not so much because the standout songs were that over the top amazing, but because those 3 songs just stood out that much more above the rest of the album. And that's kind of the question mark right there as far as going forward. So this is a kind of controversial category, to where you can get the points but still not actually done a good job. Next one is going to be cohesion. Cohesion is going to work kind of a lot like pacing in a lot of ways, but a little bit different. As far as cohesion goes, cohesion is more like your engineering of the album. When I say engineering, it's more like, did you actually have this situation where you mesh the tracks together well? Did it feel like you tried to experiment with too many subgenres of metal, or did you make a consistent, cohesive album that actually flows and functions together? Am I gonna find random points in the album where I'm just all of a sudden just like thrown off my groove, and I'm just like, this song doesn't belong here, which can happen very often. For instance, my favorite band, Incubus, released an album recently, which Incubus is not metal by any chance, but I'm just saying this is one of my favorite bands. They released an album very recently where, there was a track that, they're making their, normal kind of, groovy kind of, half love, half, just having fun songs, and all of a sudden you have like this one song where they're just like talking kind of weird, and it's like there's like an offbeat reggae drum in the background, and it's not even really a song, it's more of just some guy talking for like 2 minutes, and it's just like, this doesn't belong here. Like, why this doesn't belong here. And that's the big deal for me. Is the album cohesive? Does it flow together? Is there a spot in the album where I feel like the brakes were hit and not hit in a good way? That's what cohesion is to me. The next one is going to be replaying or replayability. Basically, this is for me is and it's kind of a lot like Standouts, but it's more of is the album one that even with the Standouts with the album, is it a situation where I can tell you right now, am I gonna go back and listen to it a month later or 2 months later, and is it an album that I got this feeling of that I'm gonna be excited to have in my catalog for the rest of my life, to where I'll be sitting in the gym one day and I'm just like, oh yeah, I want to hear this track, or I want to hear this album. Let's put the album on and just get it, man. Or am I driving in the car and I'm just like, I'm just gonna put this album on and just leave it be. That's replaying for me. And so replaying and Standouts kind of work together, but they cover slightly different aspects, which is why I think it's still important to talk about. And also it gives it a bit more of a worth as far as just is the album one that's likable versus just the artwork. I don't want the artwork to be that one of those where it's like, oh, their artwork's bad but the album's amazing, so screw this album though. Still, no, we don't want that. The next one is going to be really the hardest one to look into, and it's actually preference. Preference, which I'm pretty sure I spelled it right there, but preference is essentially going to be the subjective part of the actual. It's going to be 10 points that basically the individual reviewer basically can drop his personal opinions as far as just nothing compared to an actual aspect, but just compared to the fact that the idea for them personally of, do they actually like this style or not? Do they actually like this version or not? Do they actually believe this is actually a good piece to the subgenre that they're actually in? This is going to be a highly subjective part, but at the same time I think it's very important to have a clear, concise 10-point spread where the reviewer is completely in control and doesn't have to answer in a objective fashion or try to answer in an objective fashion, but gets to be full on subjective without recourse or without having to try and explain their reasoning right there. So 10 points for personal preference. Next, we're gonna have suitability. And suitability is kind of a little bit of a weird one. This may sound very awkward, but suitability essentially is essentially this. Is this an album that I can pair with other albums? That's really what it's going to be. Is this an album that is so... Is this an album that if I listen to this album, am I able to listen to something else alongside it and really still be able to groove it? If I took individual songs from this album and put it in a shuffle setting on my iPod, am I gonna get really weirded out whenever it comes on? If I keep my little subgenres or genius mixes or whatever, and it comes on, is it gonna be one of those where I'm still grooving, or is it gonna be one of those where all of a sudden it's like hit the brakes hard and we ain't feeling it anymore? That's suitability right there. Is it able to mesh with other artists? Are the tracks on here tracks that have to be listened only with the band's other works, or is it something that can be listened to elsewhere? That's a big deal. That's a big deal. It really is, because especially if you're looking into Sirius radio or whatnot, or any type of internet song streaming service. It's very important to have a situation where your tracks are able to swap about and be listened to not as a part of the album itself or as a standalone, but be able to work in a setting where they are up in a rotation with other bands' works. Very important. And then the final category is going to be mastery. And mastery is essentially just it's this. Is the band being held back by a certain member? Does the album feel like there's one member holding the band back? Does it feel like, is the band in a situation where you can clearly tell these guys really know what they're doing and they work well together, and their prowess on the instruments is amazing? Or is it one of those where you can see or feel that, hey, if there was just one less person in the band, or they changed this one person out, it would be better as a whole? That's an important part as well for me. I believe that if you have a good band and you have a good backing support band, you're able to put together a lot better work. For instance, look at Megadeth. Megadeth's best albums were when he had really the best supporting musicians alongside him. Whenever he got Chris Boderick, I believe it's how say his name, and they had him on board for the United Abominations album, and then they gelled even better during the Endgame album, which the Endgame album, I believe, over the test of time will end up becoming widely known as one of the top Megadeth albums ever, because of just how good it was. And it really was a technically proficient and masterful album where you could really tell that there wasn't any musician really holding the band back. And that's a big one for me. So those 10 categories: production, artwork, songwriting, pacing, standouts, cohesion, replayability, preference, suitability, and mastery are going to make up your 100-point score for each one of these albums that we're reviewing. I wanted to take a moment to go over this in full detail so you understand how we want to talk about these albums on here. So whenever you start seeing us post reviews, you're not going to be left in the dark kind of wondering, the heck's this guy talking about? Anyway, Warriors, I'll see you around next time, and as always, keep stealing the kneecaps.